Hi, everybody. Guess who's back? Billy, and this is Antioch, Chapter 13, Andalyn's Scars. Andalyn sat on the edge of her bed, wearing a nightgown. Sarah crept in with a candle and closed the door. She set the flickering light on the dresser and then sat down, cross-legged opposite the sailor. Sarah said, "Ditch is such a jerk, isn't he?" "No, he meant no harm. He is a close friend." "Why'd you get so upset?" "I should not have left the room like that. It was childish." "Oh, no, I wouldn't call you childish. You're the bravest person I've ever met." "That is a strong compliment." I can't even imagine doing the things you've done, and you don't even talk about it. You didn't tell us any of this stuff yesterday. With all that, you brought Davies a drink and didn't even care." Andalyn smiled. It was a rare kind of praise Sarah gave. "And I love your hair. What a color!" "You cannot possibly like it. I've been cutting it with a knife." Sarah moved over to Andalyn's bed. "Wow! Mom would kill me if I did mine that way. I like it short." Sarah's hair hung to her lower back in healthy black waves. Andalyn's was roughly chopped above the shoulder. To Andalyn's surprise, the girl started handling it. Sarah talked about hair for a little while, and then said, "I hope Drake comes back. Do you think he will?" She bit her lip in a frown. "I doubt your father would allow it." Sarah groaned and flopped down on the bed. "Ugh! He wants me to marry Daniel." "Preposterous. Daniel is too young." After saying it, Andalyn realized she did not know the marrying age in Antioch. Before, in what the sailors were starting to call the Old World, there had been nations in which 13-year-old grooms and brides would have been perfectly legitimate. Andalyn had voted to raise the legal age to 18 in her own district. Sarah said, "Oh, not right now, when he gets older. Daniel owns land." She rolled her eyes. "I understand." "Daddy wants me to get Daniel to like me. I tried, but the only thing Daniel likes is frowning like a toad moping around in the kitchen. He's so glum. I guess because his father and sister died." She thought about it. "His mother's dead, too." "But Drake's been through worse than that, and he's so mature about it. Ooh, what would you do?" Andalyn paused at the discovery of someone who considered Drake to be mature. "It could be hazardous for me to advise you on this, Sarah. We have different customs where I am from. I do not want to cause any trouble for your family. Also, having never been married, my opinions on the subject are of dubious value." "What about that man you were with tonight?" Andalyn smiled. "Biggs. I like him very much." Sarah sat up. "Is he your boyfriend? Do you kiss him?" Andalyn raised an eyebrow. "I'm far too old to gossip about kissing my boyfriend." Sarah screwed up her face. "How old are you?" Andalyn had to think about that. Telling Michael the truth about her age was one thing, but from what she had learned so far, the average person in Antioch would not believe it. Andalyn had trouble believing a mirror. Faced with the choice of answering the question, lying, or avoiding it, she said, 52. Sarah's expression went flat. "Sure, okay." Andalyn said, "It is the truth." She then told openly about Zeke, his astounding ability, and some of the other sailors' ages. Sarah was unsure, but Andalyn spoke without a hint of humor. When Andalyn finished, Sarah said, "That's really, really old. My grandmother's 56. The way Sarah said really, really old made Andalyn feel ancient, despite Zeke's cosmetic hospital. Sarah studied her. "Why didn't you ever get married? You kept your looks well enough." Andalyn almost said she'd only had her looks for a year, and that her looks were not much to speak of, but she did not want to fish any more compliments out of Sarah. Before having become Army Mom and Shooty McShoot-Shoot, Andalyn was known around the president's offices as the dump truck, and resented ever being told she looked young or pretty. I had an index of reasons, but I normally cited my career. Sarah had never heard words like index, cited, or career. Andalyn clarified. "Because of my work." "Oh, sailors don't marry?" Andalyn laughed. "No! I mean, yes, they do, but I am not a sailor. Not really. I loathe the water. No, before the outbreak I was an elected official. I sat on the President's Advisory Committee to the Grand Duchy of Andalynns." She made an elegant gesture in the air with one hand. "Wow! What's a duchy?" Andalyn had always found the correct pronunciation of the word duchy to be rather comical, especially considering the grandeur it was often intended to convey. And the Duke of Andalynns had been such a ridiculous man that he could have been called a Grand Duchy without having to explain the meaning of the term's misuse or mispronunciation. Andalyn started to chuckle. "What's so funny?" "The word is pronounced duchy. It is the territory governed by a duke or duchess." "Oh." Andalyn smiled warmly and continued. "I cannot think of a better word for what I am now than sailor, but the truth is that my survival required I become one in spite of myself." "Ditch said you were with soldiers before. Is that what you were? A soldier?" She was eager to hear Andalyn had been some kind of warrior.
No, I was a politician.
The soldiers found me hiding in the cafeteria of the Capitol building. They saved my life. Sarah screwed up her face again. I don't understand. Why did you lead everyone ashore and teach them about the Bowron? Why didn't the soldiers do all that stuff? Andalyn's smile faded away. Because they all died. Sarah crossed her legs again and waited for the story. Andalyn took a moment to decide if she wanted to tell it. Then she picked up her gun belts and put them on the bed. These belonged to Sergeant Sebastian, referred to by his men as Boss. He gave me his pistols because he did not have enough rifles to, in his words, waste one on a priss. Despite my being a priss, he felt it was important for me to carry a weapon. Can I see one? You may, but you must be careful. Do not point it at me. Sarah held it in both hands like she was cupping water. Wow, it's heavy. Yes, pistols are interesting weapons. While rifles are useful for survival, these are only good for killing people. Sarah became uneasy and handed it back. Andalyn checked it with comfortable dexterity and then holstered it in her lap. These are 357 Springsteen pythons. Boss liked to say that God did not make men equal. Springsteen did. From what I understand, Captain knew him. Who, Boss? No, Springsteen. In the 12 days I traveled with Boss, I never fired these. We had a system for eliminating Bowron from a distance that worked rather well. That part of the system did not involve the effective range of a pistol, and silence was always more valuable than target practice. Andalyn looked away. On that 12th day, deep into the outbreak, we were searching an abandoned building for supplies, scavenging. A group of Bowron happened upon us and followed us in. We tried to run through, to escape by the rear door, but it was locked. We were trapped. Sarah twisted her blanket into a knot. What did you do? Nothing. When the Bowron attacked, I did nothing. I was too frightened. I cowered like a child and watched those brave men die, fighting. Then I died as well, without having fired a single shot. But I assume that is when Zeke found me. Oh! Andalyn checked the other pistol. These will be empty before I die again. Sarah said, Wow, and sat for a while, thinking about the story and about how Andalyn had fled the common room before. What happened when the people on your ship got sick? Andalyn nodded. It will come out anyway. You must understand, they were not monsters at the time, only frightened people. But if I did nothing, they would have endangered everyone aboard. What did you do? I used the pistols. Sarah swallowed. We were incapable of treating the infection. We could not allow anyone to turn. Andalyn stared at the weapons in her lap, tensing the muscles in her jaw, thinking about Biggs and Moreau. Were you always the one that, No one wants to do something like that. From the first time, I could see it was my responsibility. Oh, that's awful. I'm sorry. Andalyn gave a shrug of a nod. I was afraid for it to come out like that earlier, so soon after our arrival. But what I did on the ship, was necessary. I had no choice. I apologize if I have disturbed you with this information. Sarah shook her head. I understand. I'm not a child. Sarah lay awake for hours that night, flinching at small noises. When she finally slept, she dreamt of Bowron in the common room. Had she ever seen one, it might have been a nightmare. Instead, they all looked like her handsome 56-year-old grandmother, someone Sarah deeply loved. Out of character, however, the zombie granny slopped food on the floor, left poor tips for Sarah, and called her a doochie. Sarah hated the doorbell in that dream. It kept ringing, and every time it rang, another rude, frugal grandmother marched in to make a mess. Then one of them put a strong hand over Sarah's mouth. She couldn't get away. She woke up early in the morning before sunrise, stifled by a real hand that smelled like sour milk. Andalyn's lips touched Sarah's ear. Do not make a sound. Keep your head beneath the blanket. When I tell you to hold your breath, hold it for as long as you can and do exactly as I say. Do you understand? Sarah nodded, and Andalyn released her. A pistol clicked. The doorbell rang. Margot sat up in bed next to Fergus. Chairs started groaning on the floorboards downstairs. Fergus said, I didn't lock the door. I forgot. Oh, Fergus, what are we going to do? Sarah? And Daniel? She put her hands over her mouth, thinking the worst. It's probably just one of them, up for a snack. Or Marabbas. I'll go have a look. Fergus rubbed his face and got out of bed. Be careful. When the bell rang, Daniel woke up halfway, trapped between sleep and consciousness. He stared in the direction of his door, into the empty darkness. Then he heard footfalls on the stairs. The terror of the treehouse returned. Daniel tried to move, but his body wouldn't respond. He tried to call out, but he couldn't make a sound. His door opened. A silhouette stood against the dull red glow of the dying hearth. From down the hall, Fergus said, "Who's there?" The figure turned. At that moment Andalyn burst out of the door between them and opened fire, shouting, "Hold your breath! Hold your breath!" Fergus yelped and leapt back into his room. The gunshots jolted Daniel into a fully conscious yell. The figure stumbled back as Andalyn blasted it, aiming with the pistol flash. It collapsed. She swapped out for her second revolver and emptied it into the corpse. Then Andalyn ducked back into Sarah's room, shouting, "Everyone put a blanket over your head and get outside right now! Right now! Hold your breath! Hold your breath!" She repeated that at top volume while grabbing her own blanket. She couldn't find her mask. Margot said, "Oh, Fergus! Oh, no!" and stepped over the corpse, feeling her way down the stairs behind her husband. Fergus said, "It's okay, Pepper. Everything will be okay." Andalyn shouted at them, "Hold your breath!" and reloaded as she followed. "Keep your covers on! Outside! Outside!" When she felt the night air on her ankles, she ripped the blanket off. 3 others stood in the street, blind, like they'd forgotten to cut the eyes out of their ghost costumes. Andalyn clenched her teeth. "Someone is still inside!" She grabbed the shortest head. "Who are you?" "Daniel, ma'am." Fergus and Margot gasped and pulled off their blankets. Their daughter was still in there. Andalyn ordered them to stay where they were. Back under cloak, she ran up the stairs, stumbling over the corpse at the top. Sarah was sobbing in bed. Andalyn grabbed 2 fistfuls of the girl's covers, nightgown, and hair and yanked her to her feet. Sarah blubbered, "Please don't shoot me with the pistols." At a loss for any other word, Andalyn said, "Unprecedented!" and dragged the squealing girl from the room. They thudded down the stairs and out the door. That time Andalyn was relieved to find all 4 of them. Fergus and Margot snatched up their child frantically, bedclothes and all. The clouds parted overhead, showing some of the street. Andalyn couldn't smell anything on the wind. She said, "Take the blanket off, Sarah." Sarah dropped it on the ground. Andalyn looked down at it. "Pick it up! You might need it!" Sarah dipped her knees to do as she was told, her face floating like a tragic mask on a stick. Andalyn said, "Fergus, we need to reach the church as quickly as possible. There is at least 1 more of those things out here." Fergus said, "Follow me!" The 5 of them jogged away in their nightgowns, blankets tucked under their arms. Daniel said, "How do you know there's another one?" There was no emotion in her response. "Because that was Drake." Sarah started to wail. Andalyn watched their backs as they went. She decided against telling the girl to be quiet. If there were any other Bowron lurking the streets, Andalyn thought it best to lead them to Michael. It wasn't long before she saw something in the night behind them. Its movement before its shape. A steady, loping speed. It gained on them. As the Bowron closed in, Andalyn noticed that much of its flesh had decayed. What remained swung like satchels from its frame, its leathery skeletal form beneath. Its right hand was gone, bearing the 2 jagged bones of its forearm like the fangs of a serpent. Andalyn said, "How much farther, Fergus?" and fired a shot on the run. They jumped from the unexpected blast, and shrieked when they saw what chased them. Fergus said, "We're almost there!" Andalyn missed again. Their bare feet left the painful cobblestones. They ran faster on the grass, and the Bowron slowly faded into the night behind them. Then they were dodging through the headstones. Margot said, "There it is!" The church took form in the moonlight ahead. Lot sat on the grass in front of it, gaping at the coming group. Behind him, the heavy door was shut. Andalyn narrowed her eyes on that door. It was locked. She knew it. She snarled, "Get Michael! Get Michael!" turned, and planted her feet. Daniel and the others flew by Lot and into the church. The front door was never locked. Lot watched them run in, and then looked back across the yard at where Andalyn's pistol barked and flared in its smoke like a tiny thunderstorm. Lot hopped up, shouted, "Fly!" and bolted inside. Bullets ripping through it, the Bowron closed distance with every flash. It slammed into Andalyn, and they both hit the dirt. Then it sat up on her stomach and started punching her with the barbs of its broken arm. Shuck, shuck, shuck. Screaming, she shoved her pistol under the ghoul's jaw and pulled the trigger. Click. It was empty. John, Michael, and Abraham leapt up from their mats and long handles. Everyone had just burst in shouting urgent versions of what was happening outside. "Andalyn's out there! She's shooting at the devil! I just arrived!" John rushed to Daniel. Michael sprinted out the door. The blasts and the screaming had stopped. Their bodies appeared to be still, but Andalyn's second pistol was clicking into the ghoul's dead weight. She'd drawn it dearly. Michael flung the corpse away from her like a dusty rug. The clicking stopped. The smoke touched his eyes, and they glowed. God's mercy. Andalyn's face had been raked from the bone. Her flesh hung in strips. Her breath rattled in her throat and hissed. Michael knelt beside her, gingerly replacing what he could. The light faded from his eyes until he couldn't tell blood from ink or earth in the dark. Abraham arrived and watched them for a few tense seconds. He understood what Michael was trying to do. If he opened the way without replacing her flesh, the healed wounds would be grotesque. But Abraham could also see, from where he was standing, the Rin thinning to a shimmering thread within her. He said, "No time for that, Michael. She'll die. Do it now." Michael put his blood-slick hand on her forehead. Golden light exploded through the churchyard. That is the end of Chapter 13. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can follow the link at the top of my website, www.williameharlan.com, and purchase the full novel from Amazon in ebook format for $2.99, or as a paperback for $12.99. Thanks for listening. Tune in next week for Chapter 14, Templar.